Welcome to Acronym TV. I'm your host, Dennis Trainer Jr., and yes, I'm fully aware that the TV element of Acronym is missing this week. I'm sorry. We're working through some technical and staffing issues here at the studio that limit our ability to deliver video. And so for the time being, Acronym will be an audio-only podcast. Now, please know that I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that we can return to the video component of the program as soon as possible. And for those viewers or now listeners who desire more information, you can visit acronymtv.com, hit the contact button. I'll give you some more information. Okay then, without further ado, this week on Acronym, an interview with Justin Wedes of the Detroit Workers and Builders on solidarity actions with the residents of Flint, Michigan, the campaign to arrest Governor Rick Schneider and repeal the emergency manager law in the state of Michigan. But first, and this is a special exclusive in cooperation with the newly launched podcast Below the Fold, which I also host, here is an excerpt of my conversation with the creator of the OscarsSoWhite campaign, April Rain. Fascinating interview. To hear the full interview, again, this is just an excerpt, visit BTF Pod, short for Below the Fold podcast, so btfpod.com. Welcome to Below the Fold. I'm your host, Dennis Trainer Jr. Below the Fold is a new podcast wherein arts and culture meets politics and social justice. This is our first episode, and I'm very happy to welcome April Rain, the creator of the OscarsSoWhite hashtag and online viral campaign, as our interview guest. But first, let me set up a little context here. Ironically, it's the success of April's viral OscarsSoWhite campaign that makes this year's show, with Chris Rock serving as the MC for an Academy Awards ceremony where a grand total of 0 black actors were nominated in the individual acting awards categories, must-see television. Sure, Straight Outta Compton, a biomusical pick about a group of black kids who scared the crap out of white America, was nominated for Best Original Screenplay. Sure, but the writer is, drum roll please, a white dude. So the coming Chris Rock moment, a blackberry filled with sweet juice, is ripe with potential. Why do I say that? Here's what I think. With the reverberations of Beyonce's performance at the Super Bowl halftime show, wherein she honored the Black Panthers and Malcolm X, still sending ripples of energy around the world, followed by Kendrick Lamar's absolutely stunning Black Lives Matter performance at the Grammys that almost literally burned down the house in an evening that also saw Hamilton, a Broadway musical that tells the story of the American Revolution as an immigrant story and recasts the founding fathers as people of color, mostly African-American men, saw Hamilton walk away with some hardware. That adds to the groundswell of waves crisscrossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring into which Chris Rock will step to the mic on Sunday night to host the Oscars at a cultural and historical moment with the opportunity to sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Okay, I'm probably overstating it a little bit, but you get the point. So, is Chris Rock going to take Beyonce's lead and step into formation? Rock is a comedian with a unique ability to shake us out of complacency and see historical moments from a perspective that are both disquieting and unimpeachable.
When you see footage of the 60s and see black people, see us getting sprayed down and hosed down and dogs getting sick on us and little girls getting burnt up in churches, that's just white people being nice.
Speaking of the 1960s, among the movies singled out in Ibram X. Kendi's must-read article at Salon.com entitled The 15 Most Racist Oscar Films of All Time is the 1968 film Planet of the Apes. Kendi talks of the Academy's history of promoting racist narratives and summarizes the Planet of the Apes in the following way, quote, "Black people had long been likened to apes in racist mythology, and so it is hardly a stretch to say the film's apes, who enslave the white astronauts after their long space journey, signify black people in this movie. After one white astronaut escapes, he comes upon a rusted Statue of Liberty and suddenly realizes he's back on Earth. After years of domestic and foreign anti-racist rebellions, racist Americans actually feared a violent black revolution could be on the horizon in early 1968, fears reflected in the Planet of the Apes. To racist whites, there could only be a white supremacists or black supremacists in power. An equitable society is beyond the racist imagination, end quote. So that brings us to now, or at least historically speaking, this extended moment of now. In the wake of the assassination of Trayvon Martin in Florida, the assassination of Michael Brown in Ferguson, the assassination of Eric Garner in New York, 3 cases amongst an epidemic of systemic racist violence and murder, the Black Lives Matter movement emerged. As historical moments go, we're still in the thick of this one, but things may be trending in a positive direction. The Pew Research Center has been tracking Americans' views on race relations since 1986. That's the year that Martin Luther King Day was first observed as a national holiday here in the States. And a summary of the center's most recent findings, released in January of this year, notes that 6 in 10 Americans thinks the country needs to continue making changes to assure that blacks have equal rights with whites. That's a substantial increase over the previous year. And a growing number think that racism is a big problem in our society, and a majority of Americans now give police a poor grade when it comes to treating people of color equally. The summary of findings also notes that 57% support the removal of the Confederate flag from the state grounds in South Carolina. Another way of looking at it is, where is the progress when more than 4 in 10 people think that the flag representing slavery should remain up on the state grounds paid for by the taxes of the ancestors of former slaves? For those of us, white like me, it sure is easy to get excited about progress while still reaping the rewards, sought or unsought, of white privilege in a systemically racist society. If art is a mirror held up to nature, then Hollywood's mirror is regressively myopic. So, in my embrace of the OscarsSoWhite campaign, I'll implore Hollywood to take Bertolt Brecht's words to heart when he said, quote, "Art is not a mirror held up to reality, but a hammer with which to shape it." For Below the Fold, I'm Dennis Traynor Jr. My interview with April Rain right after the jump. Listeners, we want your feedback, and we're going to incorporate it into future shows. So go to the btfpod.com. That's btfpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for free on iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud, and use that contact form to let me know what you think. I'll read your responses to your comments in future episodes. Okay, let's go below the fold. All right, so I'm very happy to welcome April Rain, the creator of the OscarsSoWhite hashtag and online campaign, to join me on this, the first episode of Below the Fold, where we dig deep at the intersection of arts, culture, politics, and social justice. April Rain practiced law for over 20 years, honing her talent for public speaking and persuasive writing, but it wasn't until she walked away from her legal practice that she found her true passion. Now, as managing editor of BroadwayBlack.com and editor-at-large of New Tribe magazine, April is able to capitalize on her strengths and pursue her calling, using her voice to spark dialogue and explore issues of race, politics, and culture. As I said, April is the creator of the viral OscarsSoWhite campaign and an influential and sought-after social media presence, having built an organic following of over 21,000 worldwide. You can follow her on Twitter, where she dispenses wit, provocative thought, and information 140 characters at a time. The National Journal agreed and recently named April one of the top 15 accounts on Black Twitter. Rain writes for various digital publications, appears on TV, radio shows, and enjoys speaking to audiences nationwide. April, again, thanks very much for joining me today.
It is my pleasure. I am honored to be your first ever guest.
Yeah, so for people who don't know me, if they don't know me from my TV show Acronym TV or from the documentary work that I do, just a little bit of context without belaboring it too much. I am a white dude in my middle 40s. I am the beneficiary of unearned white privilege, but I try to be an ally to issues and people connected to the Black Lives Matter movement, and sometimes, perhaps now, stumble, and I still have much to learn, so I'll acknowledge that. April, we've defined who you are. Let's just dive in, and I'd like to, if we can, establish the context culturally and historically in the following terms for the OscarsSoWhite moment in time. From a social and political justice point of view, I think that there is a relationship and quite possibly, and I'll let you explain in a moment, a linear narrative coming out of the Black Lives Matter movement. But then from an artistic or cultural point of view, you know, some things that are swishing around in my mind are Hamilton, the Broadway musical we can talk about, Beyonce's recent homage to the Black Panthers and Malcolm X at the Super Bowl, Kendrick Lamar's performance at the Grammys, etc. What are your thoughts about either the linear progression or the relationship between those four things that I just mentioned?
I think it's wonderful. And I think it is just yet another example or a group of examples of how people of color should celebrate who they are. So, you know, if we're talking about Hamilton, it's sort of a retelling of the story of the founding fathers, and yet making it so much more accessible to people who, you know, may have learned in history who Hamilton and Aaron Burr were, you know, but are much more interested because it's told from a racially diverse perspective. With a hip hop beat, and so I think it makes it accessible to the masses. Similarly, you know, Beyonce and Kendrick Lamar, I think celebrated Black History Month in a fantastic way, and just you know, really spoke out using their craft about the issues that are so very important today. There's definitely a relationship, a nexus between what Beyonce and Kendrick, how they performed, and of course the Black Lives Matter or Black Liberation Matters movement that has been ongoing even before, you know, Trayvon Martin was killed, even before Mike Brown was killed. All of these things are just further examples of where we're going in the culture and how we're celebrating ourselves and each other along the way.
Yeah, and just to highlight for the maybe the few people who haven't seen or heard about Hamilton yet, I mean, this is a smash Broadway musical. It's going to be maybe the biggest Broadway musical of the last 50 years or so, in which the story of the founding fathers and Alexander Hamilton specifically is told, as you said, through hip hop, but also it's not diverse or what I would consider normally kind of color blind casting. The casting seems quite color aware, and that all the founding fathers are people of color.
And it's color conscious, I think is the phrase that's used, as opposed to colorblind. So, and I think it's really fantastic. You know, and Hamilton is wonderful in so many ways. I mean, not only is it a great production, but I think it shows that if it's a good story told well, that people will fill the seats. And, you know, and we see that similarly with Star Wars. If we're relating this back to film, you know, Star Wars has grossed over $1 billion worldwide, but it has a female lead and it has a Black male lead. So the argument that either women or people of color or people from marginalized communities can't open a show or a production or a film, or can't, you know, or that white people won't go see it, falls flat on its face, based on what we see from Hamilton, which has been sold out forever, and I think, you know, at least until October of this year. And similarly with the numbers, the box office numbers for Star Wars.
How do you view then Beyonce and Kendrick Lamar's recent kind of performances? Is this an issue of superstars taking a clue from grassroots movement, or just, you know, artists kind of borrowing from things that are out in the ether at the time? Or are they empowered to speak things that have been on their mind all along because of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Right. I think it's the latter, but I want to give more credit to Beyonce and Kendrick Lamar because they have made strides, even separate from, you I don't want to say that they only did this, or they were spurred to do this by the Black Lives Matter movement. I want to say that they did this because they thought it was the right thing to do,
Mm.
period. And the fact that it correlates with what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement is a great plus. But if we listen to Kendrick Lamar, I think last year performed his song "All Right," at an award show, and it is also very deep and introspective with respect to Black culture and state-sanctioned violence. We know behind the scenes, Beyonce has done quite a bit to help the movement for liberation of people of color and marginalized communities. And so this was just yet another example of her being able to use her platform, perhaps much more publicly this time, to speak out on issues that are important to her.
Now, let's talk about the Oscars So White now, transitioning. Describe the moment, what was the straw that broke the camel's back when you decided to launch this hashtag?
I wish I had a sexier story to tell, but I was watching the nominations last year, January of 2015, in my family room and getting ready for work. And I was frustrated and disappointed with the lack of marginalized communities that were represented in the nominations, both in the acting categories, which, was very stark, but also with respect to those who tell the stories behind the camera, all of the filmmakers, the directors, cinematographers, producers, and so on. And so I just took to Twitter to vent my frustration. The very first tweet was, "Oscars so white, they asked to touch my hair." And it was just a snarky, sarcastic, comment. It's just what I was feeling at the time. And so, and people ran with that. So it started out as a joke. People were just, realizing, seeing what I saw, from Spike Lee's movie, Do the Right Thing. There were no brothers or sisters in this case up
Right.
on the wall. And so people just ran with it. And then the conversation turned into something much more serious when we started having discussion on Twitter about, the lack of representation in film.
Let's take a quick side trip to Do the Right Thing. As a teenager, that was one of the biggest kind of moments in my life, just stylistically, and it was an amazing movie. Did Mookie do the right thing?
I think he did. I think he's going to have to pay the price of breaking that, shattering that window.
Yeah.
But I think in that moment he did what he felt was right, in protesting, the death of Radio Raheem and the lack of representation up on that wall of Sal's Pizzeria, and just the overall treatment that he had received from Sal and his sons. Pino more than Vito. But in his sons while working there. And so he'll have to face the consequences, but we all do when we stand for what we believe is right.
And Mookie's alter ego, Spike Lee, is obviously grown up like the rest of us. Does he still have that same Mookie in him? I saw him say, at the beginning of this whole process that he was boycotting the Oscars, but then I've seen him kind of backpedal that and say, "I'm not boycotting, I just happen not to be going."
Right. And I think all of us that are sort of in this campaign for Oscars So White are not using the term boycott, because I think that's a flashpoint that the media uses because it's easy and simplistic. What I'm saying, and I think what Spike and Jada and others are saying, is that, at least for me, I'm going to be involved in counter programming. Other people are just saying they're not going to go. But I don't think any of us had the plan, or at least I can only speak for me. I don't have the plan to be in LA on Sunday holding up my poster board saying "down with Oscars," or trying to block people from the red carpet. And that's what I think of when I say boycott. I did not watch last year for the first time in 30 years, and I won't be watching this year. Instead, I am inviting people to join us via Netflix and live tweet the movie The Wood, which has a majority Black cast, but is a fantastic coming of age story as boys turn to men, and I think will resonate with everyone. And I picked that movie very specifically because the point is, if it's quality work, everyone will come see it, and so that ties back to Hamilton and Star Wars, and we live tweeted Coming to America. I don't care what your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your age is, you have a quotable or a favorite scene from Coming to America. And that's why I chose it, because even though most of the faces on screen are people of color,
Mm-hmm.
everybody loves that movie. And so, relating it back to Oscar So White, that's what we want to see more of. It's a story that could happen anywhere. It could happen in, a Latino community, an Asian community, but it's a good story and it was told well. And so why aren't we seeing more of those types of films coming from Hollywood?
Yeah. The casting of Chris Rock as the host of the Oscars
Yeah.
makes my job being in solidarity with this Oscars So White and not watching Oscars So White a difficult one, because at the intersection of this Oscars So White and Chris Rock hosting, one has to think that something interesting is going to happen right from the jump.
I agree. And it's going to be hard. I mean, I take solace in the fact that I'm hoping that someone will post it on YouTube soon after so I can at least see his opening. And, and it's been reported that he revamped his monologue to specifically address the lack of inclusion in film and, in the Oscars So White issue. I think Chris is brilliant. He's known for his political and social commentary. I think there is no one better on the planet to be hosting the awards this year just because of the Oscar So White controversy. And I fully expect him to bring it. And I think the Academy does too. They've been doing some reflection and self-introspection lately, some self-reflection and introspection. And that's a good thing. So I think they're expecting to sort of be hit hard on Sunday night. And I'm sure that Chris Rock.
Okay, again, that was just an excerpt from my interview, the full interview with April. To hear the full thing again and subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher or SoundCloud, visit btfpod.com. That's btfpod.com. But now we turn to Michigan, where democracy has been hijacked and the people are being poisoned, and that's not hyperbole. Justin Wedes of the Detroit Workers and Builders explains. All right, Justin Wedes from Detroit Workers and Builders, old friend from Occupy Wall Street. It's good to talk to you again.
It's great to be back.
So, working with a new group called the Detroit Workers and Builders, an offshoot of an organization that you helped found called the Detroit Water Brigade. Obviously, a resident of the state of Michigan and outraged, as I think just about everyone else in the country is now, about the situation in Flint. But tell us, what do the rest of us not know about what's going on in Flint? We're seeing this from 1,000 miles away. What do we not know?
Well, Dennis, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that you don't know and that we don't know still. There's a lot of unanswered questions. It really begins with who knew what and when it comes to the poisoning of the people of Flint, but also, we don't know a lot of things about the quality of the water and the issue of lead poisoning across the state of Michigan, if not the entire country. So there's a lot of unanswered questions still here.
Well, before we get to the questions of who knew what and when, we did have a bunch of people who knew exactly what they were trying to do when they passed, what's it called, Public Act 4. Talk to us about what that is.
Right. So the context of this whole Flint water scandal is that the city of Flint, just like my own hometown of Detroit, was under state emergency management in 2014 when this really started to go down. This isn't just Detroit and Flint, though. This is nearly every majority African-American and poor city in the state of Michigan has been under some form of emergency management over the last few years. And that's when the state comes in and essentially takes over responsibility for the city, like receivership in bankruptcy. The elected officials, the mayor, the city council, they immediately overnight lose all of their authority and executive control in the city. And the state appointed emergency manager takes the reins. And this is what happened in Flint back in 2014, when you'll remember Detroit was teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. You had protests in the streets, workers coming out to defend their pensions. Occupy Wall Street brought out a contingent of folks from New York to stand in solidarity with them. It was a powerful moment, and the city, in the grips of this austerity-fueled mayhem, decided that it would be a good idea to start cutting off the water on thousands and thousands of families who were behind on their water bills for some reason or another. And around the same time in the city of Flint, the residents were rightfully very upset about the rising cost of water. Flint residents, according to a recent study, pay the highest rates for their water in the country. Keep in mind, that's water they can't even drink.
Yeah, we're seeing they're still getting their water bills now.
That's right. That's right. And in 2014, people were rightfully very angry about this. And the state-appointed emergency manager at the time really played on that anger to try to convince the residents of Flint to get off of the Detroit water system. The city was angry with the high rates, those high rates driven by many, many years of depopulation in Detroit and the Metro Detroit region, which left the remaining residents with obviously the bill for a huge water system, and also a lot of corruption and mismanagement we won't get into right now. But anyway, in the context of this, the emergency manager at the time, Darnell Early, got into a fight with the Detroit emergency manager at the time, Kevin Orr, and that resulted in basically Darnell Early saying, "Screw you, Detroit, we're getting off your water, and we're getting off so fast that we're going to use the Flint River in the meantime while we construct a new pipeline out to the Great Lakes, to Lake Huron." And that Flint River switch, which was made under the state-appointed emergency manager, was done very hastily. It's now coming out that local officials voiced concerns about that switch. For those who aren't familiar with municipal water systems, switching 100,000 people's water is not something you can do overnight,
right,
from one source to another. There's a whole slew of really important questions of safety and water quality, and the pipes, even the pipes that your water comes through, are suited to particular pH levels of water and chemical composition. And when you suddenly switch that, it has an effect on the pipes. And in the case of Flint, as we now know, but we didn't know entirely 2 years ago, although maybe some people did know. We'll talk about that later too. But in the case of Flint, the very, very polluted water of the Flint River quickly corroded these lead pipes, these old lead pipes in Flint. And as a result, people were ingesting actual lead, into their bodies, which, according to every scientific and governmental authority, there is no safe level of lead to consume. You should not consume any lead. And above 15 parts per billion, you start to see really damaging effects, insidious effects, mental effects, delayed development in children, lower IQs, behavioral effects, kids acting out. It's just and a whole array of other sicknesses. So it's really a nasty thing.
Including
you don't want
death.
In the water. Absolutely. And in the case of Flint, in a separate but related issue, we had a spike in Legionnaire's disease, which is, basically like an almost extinct disease in the first world, at least, where Legionella bacteria was growing in this water supply, and the cases spiked to about 87 cases of Legionnaire's disease or Legionella bacteria in 2014 and 15. That the government was aware of this spike, knew that it was attributable to the water system, didn't tell the people, and at least 10 people now have died who wouldn't otherwise have died because of this Flint River water switch. And so there's been a whole cascade of really nasty and horrible effects of this hasty decision by the state.
Justin, we're seeing a lot of people say that the hashtag arrest Governor Schneider or throw him in jail is starting to trend. What's more important, accountability of one governor or overturning this Public Act 4, this whole concept of emergency managership?
Well, it's both, Dennis. The answer really is both, and the only way we are going to overturn emergency management, in my view, is with a massive campaign to hold Governor Snyder and the administration accountable for what's happened in Flint, but also what's happened across Michigan. Emergency management is Governor Snyder's urban policy. There is no renewal policy. There is no positive agenda when it comes to Michigan's cities, and especially Detroit and Flint, because emergency management has been his policy. And I think that we're going to need a massive really uprising of people in the state of Michigan politically and in the streets to be able to overturn this really disastrous law.
And you recently went to the United Nations on behalf of the people of Flint. What was the context of your visit there, and how were you received?
Well, just to clarify, I went not just on behalf of the people of Flint. I really went through my capacity in Detroit, but these are very connected issues. And we had another representative as well, and we spoke to the issues in both Detroit and Flint. And we briefed the UN's Commission on Social Development, which is responsible for really tracking performance of the human rights goals, this so-called Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. And what we basically said is this is a really gross violation of human rights happening right here in the United States. And we need to see the pressure and feel the pressure from the United Nations on all levels of government here in the United States to really address this issue with the urgency that's required. And we still to date have not seen that urgency coming out of our elected officials. And that's really why the calls for Governor Snyder's resignation and arrest have been so loud.
There is a debate that's scheduled, I think, March 5th between the two Democratic presidential candidates that is going to, again, have the whole nation looking at this one issue. It's out there in Flint. Talk about the efforts that you're working on right now to bring people to Flint, Michigan, in solidarity with those people.
That's right. So the weekend of March 5th and 6th, in just 2 weeks, we're going to have national media and really a national platform in Flint to really bring this issue into the consciousness of the American people. I think it's safe to say that pretty much everybody in the country who's been watching the news is aware of what's happening in Flint, but we really want to put the spotlight on it and keep the spotlight there to show that the people of Detroit, the people of Flint, and the residents of Michigan in general are fed up with this corrupt and dangerous and really criminal behavior of our state government and are demanding federal and even international intervention and support to make sure that the human right to clean water is actually abided by in the state of Michigan.
And finally, Justin, we know that there's very ongoing, immediate needs for the people in Flint, and then long-term solutions that are rooted in, probably a revived democracy movement in this country, or perhaps you can outline another strategy. But I know that you sent out a missive recently saying, only half tongue-in-cheek, don't send bottled water to Flint.
Oh, it wasn't half tongue-in-cheek. It was all the way real.
So, yeah, tell us why.
Well, listen, this isn't coming from me. This is what I'm hearing from people over and over again on the ground in Flint. Don't send more bottled water. Bottled water, I'm not going to speak to the environmental implications of bottled water. Those I could speak for a while on that, and you guys all know it, I'm sure. But it's beyond that. It's really there are millions of bottles of water in Flint right now. The government has provided many bottles of water. Private charities and celebrities have famously donated millions of bottled plastic bottles of water. So it's really not a question of is there enough bottled water. The real question is, when are people going to be able to live with dignity again? When are people going to be able to shower? You can't shower, bathe your kids, cook food. You can't do all these things decently with bottled water. And the reality is that the governor of our state has turned what is actually a criminal act into a kind of charity cause, into a kind of pity party for the people of Flint. And I think it's beyond reprehensible that he's been able to avoid accountability for this by basically saying we all have to come together and pitch in to support the people of Flint. If you do want to support the people of Flint, which I hope that everybody does, the best thing to do right now would be to advocate on their behalf. Call your elected officials wherever you are. Let them know that you want to see the federal government increase their aid and support for Flint. President Obama has declared a state of emergency in Flint, Michigan, but has not gone so far as to declare a disaster, which would open up tens of millions of more dollars in federal aid. We need that funding, not just for Flint, but also for Detroit, to make sure that we can upgrade and maintain this aging infrastructure. And really, this is not just about Flint. This is about every city that has aging pipes and aging infrastructure and needs reinvestment and revitalization. And so I would say the best way to support Flint right now would be to advocate for the people of Flint, for your own city and state, and also continue to monitor the news and see what the people of Flint are demanding, because their demands are coming out more and more clearly every day. And it's a beautiful kind of uprising that's been happening here as a kind of silver lining on this really tragic and criminal legacy of our governor, who I hope will be in jail within the next year.
Justin, did I read correctly that isn't there a Nestle bottled water connection to Governor Snyder as well?
Absolutely. So the state of Michigan is surrounded by 1/5 of the world's surface freshwater. That makes it a huge source of interest for all the bottled water companies, especially as climate change really accelerates. People are going to be needing water all over the world. There's drought and famine. And so Nestle has been bottling up Great Lakes water at little or no cost to them for many, many years in Michigan. And one of the reasons they're able to do that is because a top aide to Governor Snyder, who just recently stepped down kind of quietly, Dennis Muchmore, his wife is actually a spokeswoman for Nestle. And so there's very close connections between the Nestle bottled water company and the state of Michigan. And those are very troubling, especially at a time when more and more people, we saw this in 2014 in Detroit, we were delivering water to people because they couldn't afford to pay their water bills to stay on the municipal water system. So more and more people are having to rely upon bottled water, which is kind of the ultimate privatization of the public water trust. And so it's very troubling to see that happening. And I hope that people will be very critical of the role of bottled water companies in all of this and not replace our absolutely essential municipal water systems, our taps, our shower heads, replace those with water that comes in the form of a plastic bottle that takes 3 times as much water to make than what's sitting inside of it. I mean, that's just ludicrous and costs 1,000 times more by the liter or by the gallon. So it's really just ludicrous. And we do need to be critical of these companies. And I don't think that it's their role to fix this. It's absolutely the role of the state and the people to demand that their state provides clean, affordable water for them.
Justin Wedes of the Detroit Workers and Builders, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Peace. All right, that's our show for this week, folks. Again, I'm Dennis Traynor Jr., and for more information on the timeline and how we get back to adding video to this Acronym TV show, drop me a line, visit acronymtv.com, hit the contact button. I'll be in touch with you personally. We'll work through this. Thank you for your patience as we go through this audio-only podcast formation.